looking to export from Tilt Brush, and Steam, and our streaming OBS may or may not have all yelled at each other, and so we lost audio. So I'm going to update you on how that was accomplished. And there is a website you can find online. It's really all that not that difficult, but basically you went to your liked, that heart shape, you went to your liked sketches, and then when you pulled it in, you basically were looking for export, and the way that you get to export is under you look at the main kind of little menu on your palette hand, and then there's a dot dot dot, which is like says more options. Under that is something called labs, and under labs is the export icon and export option. When you click that, by default it sticks you on your PC's documents folder. There's a folder called Tilt Brush, and so it then has another folder called exports, and under exports we now have a folder for the file that we want to work with. So we're going to go to Simmetri, and we're going to import, and we're going to import specifically from Tilt Brush. So we go to File, Import from Google Tilt Brush, and I'm going to go to, again, Documents, Tilt Brush, Exports, and I'm going to go to Skull, and I'm going to grab this Skull FBX. I'm going to hit Open. So again, what did I do? I went to File, Import from Google Tilt Brush. So that's different than the other models, which I brought in through Import Optimize. And we just do a little different treatment to Google Tilt Brush files. No, we don't handle all of the like electric WYSIWYG or WYSI gizmo strokes and things in Tilt Brush. But the main, mesh drawings and whatnot we bring in pretty well here in Simmetri. And here's our skull. It came in, and you can see that it's small. Well, relative to this eye. This eye is huge. I just pressed H for human scale. So even if we wanted to make like a huge skull, that would be plenty big. So things we're going to need to do to the skull: we need to rotate it to face us. We need to get it at the right angle. We need to maybe make it a little bit bigger, and we need to get its like center point, this pivot, to be in the right place as well. So let's take a look at what we need to do here. And then also, when you bring things in from Tilt Brush, there might be other data, other little pieces of mesh, like you may have painted somewhere out in the middle of the space, and you may not know it. So if you've done that and you try to align pivot, and get that pivot node, that center is 0 point centered in, it won't do it right because there's going to be some other data in the mix. And so what I like to do to like make sure that I'm working with just the skull is we double click it, and double clicking it in a shape like this puts you into this edit shape scenario where I can actually grab chunks of it and I can delete away chunks of it. And what I'm going to do is actually just basically make sure that it's the only item in my shape. One of the reasons that I have this idea, first of all, Tilt Brush will do this, like I was just saying, but it's got this big bounding box here, right? And so I'm thinking maybe there's a little dot or something over here, a piece of mesh that I need to like clean away. So I'm just gonna like process this like I'm preparing carrots for a stew or something, and I'm just gonna like select select out near the object but not entirely, and then I'm gonna hit delete, and you notice that it just shrunk in around this skull. This gray bounding box just shrunk in, and what that means is that some little piece of data just disappeared. There was like a little speck. Sometimes Google Tilt Brush like puts even like a little trademark thing embedded into your file. So Anyway, you can kind of clear all that out with that delete process. So I'm gonna. So then we've got this thing that's kind of properly shaped, like geometrically. The bounding box is like a lot closer to what we're working with, much more closely pressed to the skull. So the next issue is it's floating all the way up there in space, and I don't like where its pivot is. It's center point. So just like the eyeball, the next one we're gonna do is what we want to do is we're gonna apply a mesh modifier to it. Excuse me. So I'm actually gonna select it, and I just want to get its transform, get it centered on the X and Z plane. And just take its rotation. I like to basically, everything but the position in the up direction. I like to 0 the rest of them out. I'm also going to name it skull, just so we quit looking at that. It doesn't, all these files don't really necessarily have their name embedded really well in them. So you'll want to bring them in and name them right away. So we've selected our skull. We're going to expand mesh model, and we're going to see mesh modifiers. When we select it, we've got this little plus button, and we're going to plus it, and we're going to hit new align pivot. Bingo, look at that, nice. Automatically it comes into like the center, and if I rotate around the Y axis, it just pivots, and that looks really good. Moving up and down looks really good. I'm gonna hit Control Z to undo my little things, but it's pretty good. It is pretty good, I have to say. However, it seems to be looking kind of 45 degrees off, kind of like if this is, excuse me, if this is forward in the Z direction, is forward out towards the sphere, it's looking over to the right, like it's been rotated around the upwards axis, the Y axis, just a little bit. So we're gonna do one more. We're gonna do another vertex transform, and we're gonna rotate that data so that it faces towards me, out in the forward Z direction towards me. And so what we're gonna do again is, while we've selected it, come down to mesh modifiers, and we're gonna add another one that is a vertex transform. And on this transform, we're going to go to rotation, and we're going to rotate around the Y and bring it. It's not exactly 45 that I need to get to, so you can kind of eyeball this. I'm actually going to lift it off the ground, so more like coming straight at it. And it's even slightly tipped in this in this axis there. It was slightly, well. At this point, it's really up to you. Now, what's interesting is that it's now facing the direction we want. When we rotate it around its axis, it looks like a pretty good rotation, which is awesome. So now this data is prepared. So we've got an eyeball that's ready to look at something, and then we've got this skull. So I'm just going to hit R for transform scale, or you could come to scale. So if I hit R, I switch to scale. I'm just going to make this thing huge, and now it's really starting to feel like we're ready to get creepy. So now it's just a matter of like positioning for the most part. I can take my eyeball and move it. I'm gonna get rid of these human scale, which is kind of cool. It's kind of good to see how large this will be relative to you when you go into VR. So this thing looks nice and creepy. Enjoy playing with different scales. And now we're just sort of tuning it. How big should eyes be? That's kind of cartoony. That's not quite enough. I don't know. That really depends on what you're going for. I just sort of pick something that looks pretty good, fills out the socket. Now I'm just going to clone this. Oops, hit spacebar. I'm just going to hold down Alt and left click the mouse and shift. I'm going to shift drag it to the side, so it constrains to the X-axis there. And now this thing is pretty silly. Cool. So the other thing that I can do is now combine these ones. So I've got eyeball and eyeball copy. I'm going to call this one eyeball L. And I'm going to call this one, because it's on the left side, and I'm going to call this eyeball R. And then I'm going to take eyeball L and eyeball R, and I'm going to stick them under skull. So I'm going to child them so that they're going to go wherever the skull goes. And what that means is, to do that, I need to grab the words, like control select them both, grab the words, and then drag it on the skull. And very cool. So it's what's kind of cool here is that if I move, even if I move the skull, it keeps looking at that. It keeps looking at that sphere. Just wonderfully creepy. I love it. Perfect. So now we've got a skull. In fact, we could make more skulls and even make them bigger. And they all look in the same direction. So the last move we're going to do is connect this to make these eyes look at the VR rig instead. I'll get rid of human. I'll get, by pressing H, that human scale little helper. I'll get rid of G for the grid. That G, the grid helper. We can even rotate these so they're kind of like looking in. We can clone out a few more. Sometimes tilt brush files can be really heavy. They've got like a ton of mesh data in them, a lot of vertices, and once you put a bunch of them in the space, it can kind of get heavy. Well, what I've done is I've now made the center of attention the target of this look at, this sphere. And so I'm going to actually just leave it the way that it is and put it on, I'm going to put this sphere kind of hidden and put it on the VR rig. Actually, no. If I delete this, let's see. None of these things know what to look at anymore. So in that case, what you need to do is go and reassign all the eyeballs. So if you were to delete this, let's say we wanted to just focus on a square, we need to go back to UI, go back to look at, and then you're going to need to select eyeball after eyeball. So you'd select the eyeball, which you can do, and then select that one. Select the eyeball box. Then I'm going to delete these so that there's not a script looking for something that doesn't exist. And so now they're looking at that box. Cool. Which means I can delete the box. Now it'll throw an error. Have no fear. We're going to reposition it onto the VR rig. So these eyes are trying to look at something, but the something just got deleted. And it's okay. So what we're going to do is take the VR. We're going to go to the VR rig. I'm going to go to blank, which means I'm not going to be able to move unless I add a locomotion. But have no fear. I'm going to add press to fly onto my VR rig's left index trigger. So now we have the fly on my left index trigger. And so what we want to do is have it look at my eyes, which are basically going to be in the position of the HMD camera. So I want these eyes to look at my, look me in the eyes. Look me in the eyes, skulls. And so to do that, I need to click, basically go back to UI game, hit the look at node, the look at tool, click on eyeball, click on HMD camera, click on eyeball, HMD camera, eyeball, HMD camera, eyeball, HMD camera, and it overwrites the look at script underneath each eyeball when that happens, which is great. So now that we're set to have this thing look at me in the eyes, I no longer need to set these manually. I can copy these and place them out in the space. So now if I go into VR, these eyeballs should be looking at me, and let me grab my, working with the Vive today. If I take my Vive, the other thing that you'll notice, I've got my headset on and I'm facing basically away from these items. The VR rig wants to face forward in the Z direction, and actually in this case, since I faced these skulls forward in the Z direction and I want to face these skulls, I need to rotate my VR rig 90 degrees or 180 degrees so that it's now facing back towards these. If I want to face them first, if I want them behind me such that I have to turn around, then I'll rotate the VR rig backwards. So now I'm like looking away from them. And if I want my VR rig to be stationed looking forward to them on first start, kind of my first view, I need to rotate it 180 from its like typical, basically 180 from it, the way that it like gets placed in the space. So when I clicked VR and I placed the rig in the space, it was pointing away from these guys. Cool. So we've pointed it back at them, and so now when I immerse, I've got these skulls, and I'm out here in these dunes. It looks super Burning Man-y. I need to turn on my controllers to get them activated. I really just need the left one. Yeah, maybe that's what the Simmetri ought to be, is like a Burning Man art installation prototype tool. Yes. I keep looking at you. It's awesome. Cool. So this is a pretty awesome little effect. And encourage you to kind of enjoy it. I had you in stereoscopic. So to go from a stereoscopic, this is always just a good like tutorial to go from that stereoscopic view to a non-stereoscopic view. What you do is on you go to Edit, Preferences, Outputs. On the HMD camera display, render as screen, render display output, add a new to screen's output. So HMD, screen reduced auto, display it on, you could display this out to a different monitor. Like I could go to my right monitor right now, but I'm just going to go left because that's what you're seeing, and do it as add it as a screen display output. Cool. So now I'll hit OK, and then when I go into VR, you'll see it monoscopically, which is cooler. Give you another view. Fly back around. Da-da-da-da. It gets really interesting up close. And then you can go all the way through, make them look back into their own brain. Oops, I turned around. There we go. Looking back into their own brain. It's a pretty sweet trip. So you could just make a huge world of eyeballs. Very cool. Love it. So the last thing we can do, this is the basics of the effect, and the last thing that we could do is basically like put this in the dark. So I'll use the like fast and cheap sort of environment tool called Horizons, and I'm going to go to Night Full Moon. I'll click on Night Full Moon, click it into space, and you'll see that we've got a moon over our right shoulder, and then it's dark in the space, and then we'll just start adding lights. And I'll put a spotlight in the space, and it automatically points down, so I need to lift it up and then hold down Control to rotate it. And I'm going to kind of do this like flashlight effect on all of these guys, and kind of put this light in a spot where it's going to shine upwards on these characters. And then I'll crank up either intensity or area radius. You can play with either of those. And you could change the color of the light if that gets a slightly more ghoulish effect. Yeah, and then let's see. So I thought that was pretty cool. The other thing I did was I put a specific. Oops, here. Let me clone this one off. I'm just gonna kind of place these underneath all these things. And this one should be maybe a little bit brighter. And then awesome. And the other thing that I thought was pretty cool was basically getting a light directly close to the eye. Oh yeah, and I forgot to, the last thing I need to do is get you the figure out how to do the glossy on the eyeballs, which is much more kind of visible here. I'm gonna use, you see how I'm trying to get this thing to like rotate in, and I want it to like rotate. What I'm gonna use is L, which is this local frame, which means that it'll rotate much more specific to the light. So here's, let's see, L, set to world. So these lights kind of coming in on really close to the eyes are pretty cool. Maybe capturing a little of the eye well, and then I mean it kind of looks like it's emanating from the actual like skull in some ways. You could also do that. You could emanate from, but this has a pretty good effect. And then if you change these colors, for example, went legit red and then crank it up to HDR or something, you get these like glows, maybe something like orange. You get this glow off. You might do the same thing here. So let's delete this one, copy this one. So, if you're working in this scenario where you want to work on the 2D scene, and then when you just want to play it and kind of look at it, but it keeps snapping you to the into VR mode, you can set the VR rig to not active for a moment. And then you should be able to, if you're on the HMD camera viewport, you can fly that camera around as if you're like looking through it. Yeah, so and then if you want to go back into VR, basically just turn your VR rig back to active. Yeah, so we got this one glowing, and then the last thing I wanted to do was add, let's pull these lights off just for a second. I'm going to turn this light and this light off by making selecting them both and hit active false. We've got just enough light to see this shimmer, but what I want to do is select the eyeball here under, what we're under now, Skull Copy 2. I'm going to select the eyeball and I'm going to work on this material. So I'm going to work on the glossiness of this material. So again, we're here, we've selected our parent, which is the Skull Copy 2. We're going to go to eyeball R. That's the right eyeball, and you can see it's now selected. Come up here, and under its mesh model, you see all the mesh modifiers. You can collapse those back. You want to go to materials. So you're going to go to materials, and you'll see over here there's one, and what does it say there? Blend 2. If I select it, it opens up another tab with my material in it. I'm going to pin that tab using this little plus button right here, so that I can keep working on it. Now the main way I get that glossy effect is under specular. You got two controls here. One is glossiness and the other is specular level. So what I'm going to do is crank up specular level, and you can already see I'm gonna hold down Shift to get a lot more going. You can start to see that kind of the amount of reflectivity growing, and that's gonna like get to a that looks good. That kind of looks glassy, but it doesn't look wet. And glossiness will kind of make it look wet because it'll bring it into an even finer point. The that reflection will kind of be in a finer point, and so kind of working these. I don't know if Fresnel effect is going to do what we want, unless we're translucent in some amount, which would be strange. So I wouldn't worry about Fresnel effect right now. We'll make it false. But yeah, so this glossiness then, go back into VR, and you can kind of see there's even a double little pop kind of right in here. It just looks super eyeball-like. Let's go back to that eyeball. So I think the material, if I'm not mistaken, in this case, yeah, it's shared across all these models. So when I affected it on one, it affected on all the others. And there's something just absolutely kind of correct to me about that look. There's kind of a light flicker coming off the upper kind of rim of the iris, which works super well. It's an awesome model in that way. And then I'm getting glow coming from my downward light is kind of coming out here. It's coming right here at the bottom kind of part of the eye, which works really well. And then if I come inside this space, you get these. Once you add lights, at the lights in the tilt brush combination is pretty cool. You get some really nice illuminations, and yeah, it looks just like kind of when you're in painting in tilt brush. Night, full moon in Simmetri is very, very, very similar to the default space that you create in tilt brush. So there you go. You've got eyes that look at you that you got from Google Poly, and you've got a skull. And thank you to both you creators. I'll name you again, and we'll put you in the show. We'll share this with people, and happy Halloween. We will catch you tomorrow.